My friends, let us pause for a moment and recognize what has just unfolded. When we hear the phrase panic in Israel attached to a story about China and Russia backing Yemen in a historic summit in Sana'a, we are not just hearing another headline, we are witnessing a tectonic shift in the global order. The world we thought we knew is cracking, and from those cracks emerges a new reality that will shape economics, politics, and the daily lives of millions. That is why I urge you to listen closely, because what we are seeing is not isolated to the Middle East. It is a lesson about power, about economics, and about the inevitability of change. Power structures are never permanent, and that is one of the most liberating truths we can embrace if we are serious about understanding the world and finding our place in it. From the Roman Empire to the British Empire, from the industrial giants of the early 20th century to the financial powers of today, the story repeats itself with remarkable precision. What seems unshakable today becomes fragile tomorrow. What commands fear and obedience in one generation becomes a museum exhibit in the next. And yet, we often convince ourselves that the current arrangement of power, whether political, economic, or military, will endure indefinitely. That belief is not just mistaken, it is a trap, one that keeps us from seeing the opportunities that history places directly in front of us. The panic now radiating out of Israel in response to the new alignments forming around Yemen is a vivid case study in how quickly the permanent can reveal itself as temporary and how swiftly the ground beneath great powers can shift. When people look at Israel, backed for decades by Washington's military might and financial firepower, they see a fortress of security. For many, it appeared almost invincible, too deeply entrenched in U.S. strategy to ever feel real fear. But the panic now being reported tells us something vital. Permanence was an illusion. The reality is that Israel's dominance has always depended on a particular balance of global power, on a United States able to bankroll wars, shield it diplomatically, and intimidate rivals into silence. But what happens when that balance shifts, when new alliances form, and when powers like China and Russia step into roles that Washington once monopolized? Suddenly, the fortress doesn't look so unassailable. Suddenly, the players who were thought too small, too broken, or too marginal, like Yemen, become the very catalysts of change. This should electrify us because it demonstrates in real time that the so-called giants are not eternal. And here is where the motivational hook lies. If the structures of empire, of dominance, of monopoly can crumble on the global stage, why should we ever believe that the systems oppressing us in daily life, whether in the workplace, in the marketplace, or in our communities, are fixed forever? They are not. Just as Israel's confidence has been shaken by forces it underestimated, the corporations, governments, and elites that appear untouchable today will face their own moments of reckoning. They may have wealth, they may have influence, but they do not have permanence. History refuses to grant permanence to anyone. That means your struggles, your battles against unfairness or exploitation are not hopeless. They are part of the same process of change that is rattling even the most powerful players on earth. Think about this. Every empire in history proclaimed its eternity. The Romans called it the eternal city. The British sang that the sun would never set on their empire. The American establishment insists on its indispensable nation status. Yet, where are the Romans now? Where is the British Empire that once covered the globe? And where will today's unchallenged powers be tomorrow? The lesson is simple but profound. The permanence they claim is always an illusion. The world is in constant motion, shaped by struggles, by resistance, by the emergence of the unexpected. That is why panic in Israel should not be read merely as a crisis for one nation, but as a symbol of the fragility that haunts every structure of dominance. This realization can fuel us. It reminds us that even if the systems we face seem overwhelming, whether it's a workplace hierarchy that silences workers, a financial system that keeps people in debt, or a political order that seems stacked against ordinary citizens, none of it is eternal. Change is not only possible, it is inevitable. What matters is whether we recognize the moments of rupture and have the courage to act within them. Israel's panic at the sight of new alliances in Sana'a is a moment where the mask of permanence slips. It is history whispering that even the strongest can falter, even the most secure can feel exposed. So let this not just be an analysis of geopolitics, but a call to you personally. The powers you fear, the obstacles you think will never move, the monopolies you think are unbreakable, they are no different than the empires of old or the panicked governments of today. They too will crack, they too will tremble, they too will fall. The only question is whether, when that moment comes, you will be ready to seize the opening it creates. Because the permanence you think you see around you is nothing but an illusion, and illusions exist to be shattered. Small nations can shift global history, and that truth should never be underestimated. Time and again, the great empires of the world have been forced to reckon with movements, uprisings, and alliances emerging from places they once dismissed as insignificant. Yemen today is a perfect example. For years, it was portrayed as a nation too fractured, too poor, too war, torn to play any role beyond suffering. And yet, here we are. Yemen, once written off, has become the site of a historic summit where China and Russia signal their support. Suddenly, the narrative flips. What was ignored becomes central. What was silenced becomes heard. And what was marginalized steps onto the global stage with power. That is the lesson. Those who are dismissed today may be the ones rewriting history tomorrow. Look at the strategic importance of Yemen. Its geography places it at the Bab el Mandeb Strait, one of the world's most crucial choke points for oil and trade. For decades, larger powers treated Yemen like a pawn on the chessboard, something to control, blockade, or exploit. But now, by aligning with China and Russia, Yemen is no longer the pawn, it is becoming the pivot. That is precisely why Israel and its allies are panicking. They never expected that a small nation ravaged by war could suddenly rise as a player capable of tilting the balance of power. And the hook here is this: if a nation written off as broken can redefine itself in the eyes of the world, then what excuse do we have to think of ourselves as permanently trapped by circumstance? If Yemen can matter, so can you. This is not just geopolitics, it is a universal principle. In every society, those in power convince us that only the large, the wealthy, the mighty matter. They tell workers they are too small to make change, communities too weak to resist, individuals too powerless to alter the system, but history disproves them at every turn. The Cuban Revolution, led by a handful of determined revolutionaries, reshaped Latin American politics. Vietnam, a small, impoverished nation, defeated the most powerful military machine in the world during the Cold War. South Africa, once locked in apartheid, overcame decades of domination through persistence and global solidarity. These are reminders that small nations, like small people, can carry a weight that shakes the ground beneath giants. Yemen's story today continues that lineage. The motivational charge lies in recognizing the pattern. Smallness is not weakness, smallness is potential. When underestimated, the small can gather strength unnoticed. When dismissed, the small can prepare in silence. And when the moment comes, the small can strike with an impact far greater than anyone anticipated. That is why empires fear the margins, why dominant powers panic when the ignored begin to organize. They know that history is not always written by the biggest army or the largest economy. It is written by those who seize the moment when the cracks in the system appear. Think about how this applies to our own lives. How many times have you been told that your voice doesn't matter, that your actions are too minor to make a difference, that the world is too vast for you to leave a mark? That is the same narrative Yemen faced for decades. Yet now, through strategic alliances and resilience, it is reshaping the balance of regional power. The point is not whether you are small, it is whether you recognize your leverage, your position, and your capacity to shift the story. The smallest act, the smallest nation, the smallest decision can ripple outward into something far greater than anyone imagined. What Israel and the West are realizing with dread is what we must recognize with hope. Small players are not doomed to irrelevance. They are the wild cards of history. Yemen shows us that even from the ruins of war, new power can emerge, and alliances can transform vulnerability into strength. For us, the lesson is both clear and urgent. Never believe the lie that you are too small to matter. Never accept the myth that only the large dictate outcomes. Small nations can shift history, and so can small voices, small movements, small actions. If they are carried forward with vision, courage, and persistence, the panic of the powerful is the proof of the potential of the overlooked. Economics is personal, not abstract, and that is a truth most people are never encouraged to see. We are told that economics is something that belongs to experts, to charts, to numbers scrolling across a television screen, to policymakers in suits using jargon. We are made to feel distant from it, as if it is too complicated to touch our lives directly. But nothing could be further from the truth. Every rise in food prices, every dip in wages, every mortgage payment or rent increase, every job lost or job created, all of that is economics unfolding in your daily existence. The Sana'a summit between Yemen, China, and Russia is not some remote geopolitical game. It is a reminder that when global alliances shift, so too do the costs you face in the supermarket, the bills you pay each month, and the security of your paycheck. This is not abstract. It is about the life you live every single day. Consider for a moment the strategic position of Yemen at the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. If trade flows there are redirected, if China and Russia help Yemen exert influence over shipping routes, then oil prices will shift, freight costs will shift, and eventually those changes trickle down into your cost of living. That gallon of fuel you put in your car, that container of goods arriving at your local store, those are the products of economic forces that seem far away but hit you in the wallet. And here is the hook. When people dismiss these developments as foreign affairs with no impact on ordinary citizens, they are missing the direct connection between geopolitics and the meal on your table. If you think the Sana'a summit is about Yemen alone, you are overlooking that it is also about you. This is why I insist that economics must be understood as lived experience. When Israel panics about Yemen aligning with Russia and China, it is not just a political panic, it is also an economic one. Israel knows that its security and influence in the region depend on controlling trade routes, energy prices, and the financial stability that comes with U.S. backing. The erosion of that control doesn't just create political vulnerability, it creates economic vulnerability that affects investors, workers, consumers, and communities across the globe. That means the worker in Detroit, the teacher in London, the farmer in Pakistan, all of them are tied, whether they realize it or not, to the tremors created by this shifting alliance. Economics is not a subject for textbooks. It is the invisible force shaping your stability and your anxiety alike. Now, think about how this realization empowers us. If economics is personal, then it is not beyond our reach to influence. Workers organizing for better wages, communities demanding affordable housing, nations realigning trade relationships. These are all acts of people recognizing that economics touches them and reclaiming agency over it. The elites want you to see economics as abstract precisely so you will not act, so you will not demand a share of the wealth you create, so you will not question why global events seem always to benefit corporations first while ordinary citizens bear the costs. The moment you see that the Sana'a summit will affect not only Israel's strategy, but also the price of the bread you buy, you begin to grasp the interconnectedness of power and everyday life. And once you grasp it, you cannot ignore it. History reinforces this again and again. When oil prices spiked in the 1970s, it was not only governments and corporations that felt the shock, it was families across the world suddenly struggling with inflation. When financial markets collapsed in 2008, it was not only bankers who panicked, it was ordinary people who lost homes, pensions, and jobs. And when today's geopolitical realignments take shape, it will not only be diplomats adjusting strategy, it will be you adjusting your household budget. That is why this is not abstract. The global stage is tied directly to your kitchen table, and ignoring that truth only serves the interests of those who profit from your confusion. So let us reframe the story. The panic in Israel is not just about military strategy, it is about the dawning awareness that economics, trade routes, energy costs, shifting currencies is no longer firmly under Western control. And as that control erodes, ordinary people everywhere will feel both the risks and the opportunities. Yes, prices may rise, currencies may shift, markets may wobble, but in that uncertainty lies a chance to demand new arrangements, new fairness, new recognition that economics belongs to all of us, not just to the powerful. The hook here is clear. If economics is personal, then your voice matters in it. You are not a spectator to forces beyond your grasp. You are already living inside those forces every single day. And once you see it, you can no longer be told to sit quietly on the sidelines. When the powerful panic, it is not merely a sign of weakness. It is an opening for those who have long been told they have no power at all. Fear among elites is one of the clearest signals that the ground beneath their dominance is shifting, that cracks are forming in the walls they once claimed were indestructible. The panic in Israel over Yemen's newfound alliances with Russia and China is not just about geopolitics. It is about the exposure of vulnerability. For decades, Israel operated from a position of certainty, shielded by American protection and the illusion of unshakable dominance. But today, the fear is visible, and that fear reveals something important. When those at the top begin to tremble, those at the bottom must see the opportunity to move. History is full of moments when the fear of the mighty turned into the chance for the marginalized to step forward. Think of the French Revolution, when the aristocracy, long insulated by privilege, suddenly found themselves paralyzed by panic as the people rose in defiance. Or the civil rights movement in the United States, when white elites across the South watched with dread as marches, boycotts, and resistance began to pierce the system of segregation they swore would last forever. Each time the powerful felt fear, it meant their control was no longer total, their monopoly no longer secure. Fear is not just an emotion, it is an admission that change is possible. And here lies the motivational hook. If the powerful are panicking, then the powerless have more leverage than they think. Israel's panic is not confined to military or diplomatic circles. It is a panic about the loss of monopoly over narrative, over trade routes, over the assumption that smaller nations like Yemen could never matter. When that assumption crumbles, a new truth surfaces that the small, the ignored, and the underestimated can shape events that unsettle even the most confident powers. And if that is true for nations, it is equally true for people, the bosses in your workplace, the corporations dominating your community, the institutions that claim to be untouchable. They all fear something. They fear solidarity among workers. They fear resistance among citizens. They fear the realization that the very people they exploit could one day organize and challenge them. Their fear is your opportunity. This is why we must not misread panic as something distant. When elites panic, it is not the time for ordinary people to shrink back. It is the time to press forward, because in that moment of panic, their defenses are weaker, their control less certain, their grip looser. The hook is sharp here. If you only see their fear as a crisis, you miss the fact that it is also your moment to act. Israel's panic over Yemen's alliances is proof that even entrenched systems can be shaken. For people everywhere, it is a reminder that when the powerful are rattled, the playing field is less tilted than you were led to believe. Think about the 2008 financial collapse. When banks and corporations panicked, governments rushed to rescue them. But that was also the moment when millions of people realized the system was rigged and began movements like Occupy Wall Street. The fear of the financial elite created space for a new awareness, for a new demand for accountability. Similarly, the fear now rippling through Israel and Washington is not only their crisis, it is the signal that change is underway. And in change, ordinary people can find the courage to push for more fairness, more justice, more control over their lives. The panic of the powerful is not something to pity, nor is it something to fear yourself. It is a sign that the illusions of permanence are collapsing, that the unchallenged dominance of the few is no longer certain. That panic is the crack in the armor, the opening through which new possibilities can emerge. The question is whether we recognize it and whether we step through that opening before it closes. The powerful may tremble at the thought of losing control, but for the rest of us, that trembling is the sound of opportunity knocking. When the mighty panic, the people must see it for what it is: history handing them a chance to claim what was long denied. What frightens the powerful can empower the powerless, and that paradox is at the very heart of historical transformation. The panic we see today in Israel over the Sana'a summit is rooted in fear that the alliances between Yemen, China, and Russia are eroding the monopoly of influence that once seemed untouchable. But what is fear for them can be hope for others. Change is inevitable, and while the powerful resist it, because it threatens their privilege. The powerless can embrace it as a chance to break free from structures that once kept them bound. This is not simply a geopolitical observation. It is a reminder that every time history shifts, those shifts are double-edged. They are terror for the rulers, but they are possibility for the ruled. Think about what it means for Israel to panic. For years, it existed in an environment where the rules seemed fixed. American support was guaranteed, its dominance unquestioned, its regional rivals either broken or sidelined. In that order, it thrived. But now the rules are changing, and suddenly the very certainty that gave Israel comfort is dissolving. This is what the powerful dread most: the loss of predictability, the loss of a world that always bends in their favor. And here is the hook: what frightens them is precisely what can liberate you. Because when the rules no longer bend exclusively to the strong, they become open to being reshaped by the voices and actions of those once excluded. Change is frightening because it destabilizes the familiar. But what is familiar to the powerful often means exploitation, silencing, and exclusion for everyone else. When that system shakes, when the ground beneath it quakes, ordinary people are given a chance to step in and demand something different. Yemen's sudden relevance is not just a story of geopolitics, it is a story of how quickly the powerless can find new footing when the powerful falter. For decades, Yemen was crushed under war, blockade, and dismissal, and yet through shifting alliances, it now holds a lever of influence that unsettles an entire region. The very thing that frightens Israel, the emergence of a multipolar order, could be the same force that empowers smaller nations to reclaim dignity and agency. We must learn to see these moments not through the eyes of the panicked elite, but through the perspective of those gaining opportunity. History is full of examples. The fall of colonial empires was a nightmare for the colonizers, but it was liberation for the colonized. The collapse of apartheid was a terror for those clinging to white supremacy, but it was freedom for millions denied basic rights. The weakening of Wall Street banks during financial crisis is a catastrophe for investors at the top, but it is also a revelation for ordinary people who realize that the institutions controlling their lives are not invincible. The hook is clear: when the powerful shiver, the powerless should not cower, they should rise. This is the real meaning of inevitability and change. It is not just that systems evolve, it is that every evolution redistributes possibility. The panic of the strong is the signal flare that the era of their dominance is ending. What comes next depends on who has the courage to step into the breach. The powerless must see themselves not as passive spectators of history, but as participants ready to claim the spaces opened by the fear of their rulers. If Yemen can, after years of devastation, host a summit that frightens global powers, then surely people everywhere can look at their own circumstances and see that no condition is permanent, no exclusion is final, no oppression is unbreakable. The truth is that fear travels upward and downward in very different ways. When the powerless fear, they retreat. When the powerful fear, they expose themselves. Their panic reveals weakness, and weakness is the invitation for change. The hook, then, is this: do not mistake their fear for your own. Their trembling is not your crisis, it is your chance. Change is inevitable, and it is terrifying for those who built their empires on the assumption of permanence. But for those who have lived under that permanence, change is not terror, it is the first breath of possibility. The panic in Israel today is proof of that principle, and proof that what frightens them can, if seized with courage, become the source of empowerment for everyone else.